Hello everyone, Jules here for WhatCulture.com, and I want to talk to you today about the MCU, or more specifically about how you can't really think about the MCU without thinking about that man of iron, that tin titan of Tony, Iron Man. Basically the coolest kid at the school playground, Tony Stark has become the face of the monolithic movie franchise. However, as you might expect with a vast back catalogue behind him, there's a fair few things that have been lost in the mix. So let's now look at some things that you might not know about the Sooty and the Beast today. I'm pretty proud of that one. I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 things that everyone always gets wrong about Iron Man. Number 10. Tony Stark has always been like he is in the MCU. It might seem weird to think, but before 2008, Iron Man was by no means a household name. He wasn't obscure by any means, having been a regular fixture of the Avengers and the star of numerous solo comic books, but he wasn't a Spider-Man, a Hulk, or even a Captain America. Sure, he did have a cracking cartoon series from the 90s, but the fact remains it was only the most ardent of true believers who were familiar with the utter character. A character consumed by his own vices more often than not. Enter Robert Downey Jr., who did an excellent job of conveying Tony's ego, his arrogant nature, and his combative approach to dialogue, while also implementing some of his own quirks into the role too. And it's these quirks that have actually gone on to influence the comics Iron Man has appeared in since. Point being, Tony hasn't always been like Downey's portrayal, and it's only recently that this has changed. Number 9. He's just another Batman ripoff. Just because the man's got more gadgets than your mum keeps in her bedside table and also stuffs them in her fanny pack does not mean that Iron Man is just a rip-off of Batman. Also, that's my one per list. True, both are billionaires, both are orphans, and both lack any typical superpowers. Instead, they use their vastly keen intellect to outthink their opponents and more obviously create a technological suit of armor to protect them in combat. Both also give off an air of the philanthropic playboy, but scratch the surface and they couldn't be more apart. To begin with, Tony Stark was created by Stan Lee to be a cold warrior. He was designed to be as unlikable as possible, and that he was. Stark was a figure of the military-industrial complex and was about as close to the idea of the man as you could have gotten back in the 60s. He was purposefully meant to be antagonized, but only so that Marvel's readers could be given a different perspective, and to see that nothing is ever black or white, but there is always shades of grey. It was all part of the Marvel Age's intent to reflect the world outside our window, whereas Batman lacks any of that context. Factor in the duo's vastly different motivations, and it's plain for all to see that the Batman comparisons, should have flown out the window a long time ago. Number 8. Stark doesn't get along with S.H.I.E.L.D. In the MCU, Tony Stark and S.H.I.E.L.D. share a pretty simple relationship. He's recruited by Nick Fury to be a member of the Avengers Initiative, a superhero team of individuals designed to fight the battles that no one else could, except they go about recruiting him in a pretty underhanded way, with Black Widow infiltrating Stark's company to profile him, and that's where the problems begin to start. In Iron Man 2, but particularly in the first Avengers film, it's clear that Stark has a big problem with S.H.I.E.L.D., and Nick Fury in particular, with Stark not being a fan of Fury's agency. Yes, Stark does harbour a distrust for S.H.I.E.L.D. in the comics, but he didn't come to loathe them, as he even went so far as to become the agency's director in the wake of 2006's Civil War. Would a man who hated S.H.I.E.L.D. take on that responsibility? Probably best to say no. Number 7. Tony has always been Iron Man. Tony Stark might be the Iron Man, but he hasn't been the only one in the comics to take on the mantle over the years. His first replacement was Colonel James Rhodey Rhodes, who assumed the Iron Man identity back when Tony Stark relapsed into alcoholism and had his company taken over by Obadiah Stane. Rhodey would later assume the mantle of War Machine, fighting alongside Stark's Iron Man in a variety of different comics. Apart from that, there was also an awkward period where Tony's teen self became Iron Man, as it was revealed that the present Tony had been a villain all along. Much better, however, have been Tony's recent replacements, with both Riri Williams and even Victor Von Doom having assumed variations of the Iron Man identity over the last few years. Point being, Tony hasn't been the only Iron Man, and at the rate he's going through successors, expect there to be more in the years to come. Number 6, how many armors he's worn. A more literal entry compared to the others, but it's true, not even the most ardent of Iron Mans will be able to wheel off the character's armory off the top of their head. Tony has worn dozens and dozens of different suits over the years, some designed for the most specific of purposes, and as a result, it's kinda hard to keep track. A good estimate is to say that there have been over 40 suits of armor created by Stark at various points over the years, with some only featuring the briefest of moments, but to say that he's had a suit for every occasion would be probably putting things lightly. Still, be that as it may, one thing Iron Man fans won't have a hard time of answering is which suit of armor is their favourite, whether it be because the suit does something specifically awesome or just because it looks really, really cool. Every shellhead has a go-to answer for which armor is the bee's knees. Number 5. He's only ever been an Avenger. Although it isn't disingenuous to say that Iron Man is fairly synonymous with the Avengers, having been a member since the team originally came together in 1963, Earth's mightiest heroes don't own that character. In fact, Tony has hopped from one supergroup to another since his debut, with his most recent comic book escapades having seen Iron Man team up with the Guardians of the Galaxy of all people. That series, written by Brian Bendis, made for a welcome change of pace when it came to Iron Man, who had all too often spent most of his time grounded on Earth. Yes, he would return to Earth and regroup with the Avengers, but his time spent with the Guardians has been remembered fondly. Apart from the Guardians, Tony has also been associated with the Thunderbolts and even the Illuminati, a group that comprised of Earth's foremost intellectuals who conspire to tackle threats that Earth's less mighty heroes probably wouldn't understand, which also involved them shooting Hulk into space. Number 4. Iron Man 3 is a bad movie. When Shane Black signed on to co-write and direct Iron Man 3, Marvel fans were justifiably excited. The director is famed for his work on the Lethal Weapon franchise, action films The Last Boy Scout and Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, and for contributing to 1987's Predator. And then he gave us this, Iron Man 3, which divided people as if it were a blade and its audience soft pudding. Chief of complaints was the reimagining of the Mandarin being inferior to the original character. Now, it's important to be clear, however, that the original Mandarin of the comics just doesn't have a place anymore. He was kind of like a Fu Manchu-esque caricature who has no business with modern-day Marvel. And of all the ways that Black could have reimagined the villain, with having Killian be the real version of the character, was actually pretty clever. The other great thing about Iron Man 3 is that it actually feels like a Shane Black movie. There's the buddy cop dynamic shared between Rhodey and Stark, an honest appraisal of Stark's mental state after the Battle of New York that broaches themes surrounding PTSD, and Stark himself grows as a character by the time the credits begin to roll. So is it as bad as people think? Well, it was certainly a lot better than Iron Man 2, that's for sure. Number 3. Civil War destroyed his relationship with Steve Rogers. Now here's another coin toss statement. The actual Civil War comic, whilst being really, really fun, did a pretty poor job of delving into Stark's motivations and painted him as a reactionary authoritarian, hell-bent on curtailing civil liberties, which was exemplified by his transition to director of S.H.I.E.L.D. at the close of the arc. However, even with this move, he was still there for Steve Rogers' surrender, and more importantly, he was there for his death. His friendship to Steve holding resilient even under the pressures he was facing. He even goes so far as to beg Bucky to take on the role of Captain America because he believes in the power of Cap's legacy. In effect, he goes from being Steve's biggest critic to becoming his biggest champion. Number 2. Pepper Potts is his only romantic partner. For those only familiar with the MCU, chances are that you think that Tony only has eyes for Pepper. I mean, the first Iron Man certainly touched upon his playboy antics, but ever since the conclusion of that feature, Tony and Pepper have pretty much been an item. So much so that it looks as though they might even have a child in Avengers Endgame. The actual truth of the matter, however, is that Tony and Pepper have never really been able to kick things off together in the comics. Pepper was actually married to Happy Hogan for a while, and when the two tried to pick things up where they left off prior to that marriage, they both decided it couldn't work. In fact, Tony hasn't exactly had the best of luck when it comes to romance. One of his earliest romances was with Black Widow back when she was working for the USSR. Then there was Madame Mask, Sunset, and Moon-Ji, all of which won Stark's affections, and all of which eventually revealed themselves as being evil. Tough break, right? However, it's not all doom and gloom. He's recently struck up a new romance with Janet Van Dyne, and to be honest, they look pretty good together. And number 1, he's just a man in a suit of armor. In the first Avengers movie, Steve Rogers asks a pretty scathing question of Tony Stark. Big man in a suit of armor, take that away and what are you? With the implication being that Tony is nothing without the suit. That couldn't be further from the truth, but not for the reason that Tony provides in his rebuttal. Yes, Tony is a genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist, but he's also a man who put his life on the line for all of humanity at great cost to his own well-being. He's consistently battled his own inner demons to be the hero he is today. And though the character certainly possesses an abundance of unlikable qualities, he has always tried to do what's right, whether that be turning away from the arms industry or by taking on his friends to contest his beliefs. He hasn't always got it right, but Iron Man is still far and away one of the most inspirational Marvel characters going. He's constantly learning and developing, proving that while he might be encased in armor, he's one of the most human Marvel characters going.